So here we are on the threshold of a new year, begging the question, so what is it that we're supposed to think about? How do we actually ensure to prepare for this new year? And I'm going to suggest to you a little thought to consider in respect to the positive resolutions that we need to consider undertaking. You know, when I think of the mission statement of a Jew, and I try to find the right sort of analogy with which to capture our responsibility, I come up with a rather unusual parallel. I think it's best compared to a game of tag. Do you remember when you were a child and you used to play tag? Do you remember how you used to have to chase after somebody else? And when you catch that person, you run after them and you reach out and you touch them and you say, "You're it." And so it goes round and round. Surely that's what we're supposed to be doing to one degree or another. Chasing after Jewish souls, reaching out, touching them emotionally, spiritually, sensitively, impacting them, transforming them, but it doesn't stop there. It's got to be a chain reaction that now you're it. You've got to go out there and touch someone else and affect someone else in the same sort of way. And that's the way it goes, a ripple effect which reverberates around the globe. One of my favorite stories is Mr. Goldstein, who stops coming to synagogue on the weekend, and the rabbi goes to inquire as to his well-being. He's amazed to find the man in perfectly robust health. "Mr. Goldstein, you're looking fine. Why don't we see you anymore?" "Well, Rabbi, it's like this. When I turned 90, I was fairly sure I had done my time. And so I waited. Nothing happened. Before I knew it, I turned 95 and I figured, okay, had a good innings. My time is up. Again, nothing. Before I could even think about it, I was turning 100 and I was certain it would be any day now." And the rabbi says, "So what's your point?" He says, "Rabbi, now I'm 105 and I'm convinced that God has forgotten about me. I sure as heck am not going back into synagogue to remind him." You know, we live in a world that is so riddled by chaos, a world in which people are wandering aimlessly, looking for greater meaning, greater purpose, a world where adults seem out of touch with their children, and children and youth seek solace in the impediments that infest our society, a world in which our brothers and sisters in Israel are hurting, and anti-Semitism is as real today as it has ever been before, a world that is all too often gripped by war and terror, and where some may despair in the misconception that God has forgotten about me. But the reality is that for hundreds of years, perhaps since the beginning of time, the peace of this world has been waiting for your soul to purify it, to repair it, to dispel the darkness with light of Torah, tradition, goodness, kindness, bringing the message to everyone, Jew and non-Jew alike, that God has not forgotten about you. And your soul, from the time it was first emanated and conceived, waited above to descend to this world and carry out that mission. Your footsteps were guided to reach that place. And on Rosh Hashanah, we reflect on the creation of the first man. We reflect on the first soul that came into this world. We consider that responsibility and that mission statement, and then we pause to look at our own lives and realize that I am there now. Consider the following story. The scene is small town in Alaska. The young rabbi walks into the mayor's office, and I heard this from him firsthand, and he announces his presence. "I'm here to bring the spice and spirit of Judaism to the Jews of Alaska." And the mayor says, "That's fine. But in this particular town, there are no Jews." He says, "What, no synagogue, nothing?" He says, "No, nothing." He says, "Well, I traveled all this distance. Can I at least, from Anchorage to here, can I at least speak in one of the local schools?" And the arrangements are made. In that same afternoon, this young rabbi is speaking to a group of non-Jewish primary school kids about Judaism. And then he asks, "Who amongst you has ever seen a Jew?" After a small moment of silence, a little fair-haired girl raises her hand and says, "I have. My mom." It's like the rabbi who walks into a cheder classroom with a shofar hiding behind his back, and he says, "And what are we going to see on Shulchan Rosh Hashanah that we don't see all year round?" And one little girl raised her hand and said, "My mom," but that's another story. Now, what is the rabbi going to relate to this young girl and her mother? What kind of message can he impart to such deeply assimilated souls? Go to synagogue, there isn't one. Join some Jewish social group, they're the only ones in town. Leave, that's not going to go down very well. But he left her with a sterling thought that is as penetrating as it is simple. He said, "You know, for Jews, there is a very special day every week, and it's called the Sabbath, Shabbat. When Jewish mothers and daughters throughout the world have a special custom where they light a candle just before the onset of this special Shabbat. They light a candle which symbolizes illumination and warmth and peace. And then he added something which I find incredibly moving. It said when Mashiach comes, he'll first come to New Zealand, and that'll be the first place. And the last place he'll arrive at is Alaska, the two furthest stretches of the world. And he told this young fair-haired girl, imagine so many tens of thousands or hundreds of thousands of women and girls across the globe lighting that Shabbat candle every single week. It's all a chain reaction, which begins at sunset in New Zealand and ends with sunset right here in Alaska. You're the last link on the chain. Be sure to light your candle. The rest of the world is waiting for you. Could you imagine what the world would be like if we all paused long enough to think ourselves as the last link on the chain? That's our challenge on Rosh Hashanah, to dare consider this is the day that God brought the world into being. And frankly, I have my job, I have my role, and the rest of the world is waiting for me. As in the famous words of Maimonides, man is obligated to reflect upon the world as though evenly balanced, and it's his or her one good deed that could tip the scales and bring salvation to all of mankind. In simple terms, the world is waiting for you. Or in the words of our sages, man was created alone, singular, unlike plant life or animal life, because he's obligated to say, for me was this world created. Each of us should be concerned about the fact that the world was created for me, and if the world was created for me, then the world is waiting for me to make the differences that will positively affect all of mankind. So a very meaningful and worthwhile exercise is to dare challenge yourself over the high holidays. If you knew you only had moments left, ask yourself, who would you call? What would you say? Where would you go? What would you do? And then, what are you waiting for? After all, the rest of the world is waiting for you. Another one of my favorite stories about the two young Jewish brothers who were real rogues, bounced from school to school on account of their misbehavior, and with no other alternative, the parents enrolled them in this strict Catholic reformatory school, which had a reputation of zero tolerance for misbehavior. The older brother is escorted into the dean's office, a senior priest, and the other waits outside, and he says, young man, where is God? And the boy shifts his feet uneasily, but says nothing. Young man, I asked you a question, where is God? The boy squirms a little, but his lips remain silent. The priest's voice is now raised several octaves. Young man, are you listening to me? I asked you, where is God? And the boy looks up, and the priest, with a weak smile, but not a word. At this point, the priest comes menacingly from around the side of his desk, towers over the young child, and he bellows, I'm going to ask you one more time, where is God? At which point the boy jumps up out of his seat, darts down the hallway, bumps straight into his kid brother. What is it? What's wrong? Why are you running? He says, we got to get out of here, man. They lost God and they're blaming us. Some say the world is devoid of religious values. Some say this world has lost its sense of spiritual direction. Some say this world has lost God. But we need not waste time determining wherein lie the faults, whom or what to blame. That's negative energy. It's a futile exercise. Our mission is about moving forward, getting on with the business of building brick by brick, soul by soul, for a better, more peaceful, more illuminating tomorrow. And to remember this as well. In London, there is a house on Belgrave Square, which has a Norwegian flag. And the family that lives in the house speaks Norwegian. And they celebrate Norwegian holidays, and they dress up in Norwegian costumes, and they sing Norwegian songs, and they have a picture of the King of Norway. There are thousands of homes all around them that don't speak their language and know anything about Norwegian customs. This family is a minority, but I guarantee you they will never assimilate. They will remain true and proud Norwegians. You know why? Because this home on Belgrave Square is the home of the ambassador of Norway, and ambassadors are not assimilated. They know why they're there. Ambassadors are sent to represent their government no matter how many years, no matter which foreign countries, they'll never lose sight of their duty. We, Jewish people, are intended as God's ambassadors to the world. So long as we remember who we are and what we represent, we don't lose sight of our mission statement, because ambassadors always remain loyal to their duty. So on Rosh Hashanah, we have to sometimes look in and reflect and consider where else and what more we can change. Sometimes we think we're beyond change. I've made too many mistakes. The emotional impact of these mistakes impede my ability to progress. Mistakes are not a barrier to growth. When you make mistakes, don't look back at them. Take the reason of the thing into your mind and then look forward. Mistakes are lessons of wisdom. The past can be changed, but the future is yet in your power. The one thing that could never change are our souls. Our souls are what define us. It's who we are. At the end of the day, that has to always shine through in everything we do, and outwardly to the world as a whole. History stands on our shoulders every year on Rosh Hashanah. I know it's heavy, but we've been trained and we've been prepared for this job by thousands of heroes who inspired us, who taught us, who demonstrated to us. We write the next chapter. We can change. Be patient with yourself. Self-growth is tender. It's holy ground, but there's no greater investment. Think of a little egg. It may be hard for it to turn into a bird. It would be so much harder for it to learn to fly while still remaining an egg. So we can't go on indefinitely being just an ordinary, decent egg, however comfortable we might feel in our shells. We have to be hatched, or otherwise we go bad. And when we hatch, when we allow for a new thrust of spiritual energy to burst forth, then with renewed vigor, we can stretch our spiritual wings to their fullest span. And God, in turn, will be the wind beneath our wings, enabling us to soar to great heights of true bliss and lasting fulfillment. That's what we have to focus on at this point in time. And by way of conclusion, I'm going to share with you my favorite signature story that I shared with the Mill Hill community on my very first Rosh Hashanah here 30 years ago. A philosophy professor stood before his class and had some items in front of him. And when the class began, wordlessly, he picked up a very large and empty pickle jar and proceeded to fill it with rocks, about 2 inches in diameter. He then said to the students, "Is the jar full?" And they said, "Yes, it is." So the professor then picked up a box of pebbles and poured them into the jar, shaking the jar, the pebbles, of course, rolling into all the open areas between the rocks. And he asked the students, "Is the jar full?" And they agreed it was. And then he picked up a box of sand and poured it into the jar. Of course, the sand filled up everything else. And he asked once more if the jar was full, and they said unanimously, "Now for sure, yes." And then the professor picked up 2 cans of beer from under the table and proceeded to pour their entire contents into the jar, effectively now filling every empty space between the sand. And the students laughed. "Now," said the professor, as the laughter subsided, "I want you to recognize that this jar represents your life. The rocks, they are the important things, your family, your faith, your children's education, your health, your friends, things that if everything else was lost and only they remained, your life would still be full. The pebbles, those are the other things that matter, like your job, your house, your car. The sand, that's everything else, the small stuff. If you put the sand in the jar first, there is no room for the pebbles or the rocks. And the same goes for your life. If you spend all of your time and energy on the small stuff, you'll never have room for the things that are important to you. Pay attention to the things that are critical to your life and your happiness. Spend time with your children, educate them, take time to get medical checkups, be they physical or spiritual. Enhance the dimensions of harmony within your home, with your family, your spouses, your kids. Look to always add to the religious fabric of your household. There'll always be time to go to work, to clean the house, to give a dinner party, to take a holiday. Take care of the rocks first, the things that really matter. Set your priorities. The rest is just sand. One of the students raised her hand and said, "Beautiful, but what does the drink represent?" And the professor, a man after my own heart, smiled and said, "I'm glad you asked. It just goes to show that no matter how full your life may seem, there's always still room for a couple of beers." Friends, I wish you all a Shana Tova. Ensure to always put the rocks before the pebbles and the sand. And of course, say l'chaim. Toast life for all that it is, all that it does for us, and all that we bring to it. May we merit a year where the world is at peace, and in the awareness of God's love in everything, may we indeed merit a couple of beers. As God says, l'chaim, to life, to the world, and we in turn will be able to toast the long-awaited dream of only goodness, eternal bliss, good health forevermore. Wishing you all a Shana Tova.